Well, thank you for coming today. I'm going to take you through a little bit of history of Hasselblad first. Welcome all. Victor Hasselblad. The Hasselblad Corporation was developed in 1841, and it was more like a wholesale type of business. And Victor himself inherited the company in 1941. He was kind of a tinkerer, and he loved bird photography, and he wanted to develop a camera himself. But first, the Swedish Air Force asked him to develop an aerial camera for World War II. They asked him if he could make one as good as the Germans, and he said, probably not. He could probably make it better. So that's the kind of person he was. 1948, he developed the first consumer camera, which was the 1600F. And it was a focal plane shutter camera with lenses on the front. And that further developed his love for bird photography, and he also published a bird photography book, photographs of birds. 1957, the 500C was developed. And that went for about 40 years through the different 501 series, 503 series, and still in a lot of people's hands today, and still working very nicely. The lenses they also developed throughout that time period with Carl Zeiss. And the Carl Zeiss lenses are extremely sharp, crisp, great contrast lenses that really do well for digital capture. 1962, the first Hasselblad camera went into space with Wally Schirra, and there's a couple stories going around the company. There's still a couple of techs that work for us from back then, and they tell stories of the astronauts actually coming to Hasselblad for them to teach them how to use the camera. So it was very, very nice stories about, these guys that are like superstars coming to learn how to use cameras in space. 1969, it continued with Apollo 11. We still have 3 bodies up there, about 6 lenses, if anybody wants to go up and get them. They're free of charge. So there are many, many iconic images throughout the times have been shot with Hasselblad. 2002, we launched our first H camera, and that was our film camera that started the process of us going into the digital capture age. It's always been an object of desire, obviously. Hasselblad, anybody who wants a Hasselblad knows it's quality, and it's top of the line kind of camera. Only camera on the moon, literally. That is the only camera still on the moon. And some images. So we come to the CFV-50c. We started with CFV-16 years ago when we first got into digital capture. And we developed that into the CFV-39, which is a CCD sensor. And then the CFV-50, which is also a CCD sensor. But what makes this really special is the CFV-50c is the CMOS, the first medium format CMOS chip. So now we're able to get really high ISOs, ranges from 100 to 6400. So the CFV-50c is ready for today and tomorrow. We have the latest CCD sensor. It's a Sony sensor that's used in all the other digital cameras, including our H5D 50C. So it has great range. It's 16-bit capture. So instead of 14-bit DSLR capture, the 16-bit capture actually gives you 16,000 shades of gray per color, as opposed to 14-bit capture, which is 4,000 shades of gray per color. That translates into a smoother transition, much greater information. The larger pixels also, it's 50% bigger than the inch by inch and a half DSLR chips. So it's going to give you a lot more information. Bigger pixels means more information. probably around 11.5 stops of latitude. The CFV-50c fits on all of the 500 series cameras, starting back from the 500 cm, the 500C. You can put them on many of the SWCs, which are the wide-angle 38mm Biogon lenses, which are excellent for digital capture. You could put it also on some of the 200 and the 2000 series. The 200 series, which are focal plane shutter cameras, allow you to use the back with some little modification. About $250 at our repair facility to change some resistor in it, so it'll capture just as good as the 500. We use Lightroom or the proprietary Focus software. Focus is a very nice software. We've developed it over the years. It started as a scanner software for the scanners, the X scanners. But now Focus software has really developed into a very nice software. It is free of charge to download. All you have to do is go to Hasselblad.com, look for Focus software. It comes in PC or Mac oriented, and you could process your DSLR files through that just to play with it. Or you could use Lightroom. And both come with the back, the digital back. Here's a couple of just sample images that were taken. This is at 3200 ISO. This was at 200 ISO. I shot this at one of the workshops. I'll let you come up and take some closer looks, or you could go online at Hasselblad.com and really have a really close look at these files. The beauty of not having that high ISO range, you could do a lot of available light photography that you weren't able to do with medium format before. And plus the quality of the lenses, the Zeiss lenses, you're going to get some incredible, crisp, beautiful images.
Liftoff. We have a liftoff. Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Now I'm going to take you through some of the functionality of the CFV-50c. So I did tell you that it has an ISO range of 100 to 6400. I've used it at every one of those ISOs. I could tell you at 3200 it gets a bit grainy but not noisy. 6400 gets a little bit more grainy, but the noise is acceptable if you need to use that high ISO. Because you have such a large capture area, large pixels, the quality is much better than the DSLR 6400 ISOs. Some people like that graininess. I've used it and converted it over to black and white. It looks great. It has a CF card slot, and it's really neatly hidden on the side of the camera here. Goes into the side. So the whole back is really integrated into the 500 series to look just like the camera itself. The chrome edging, the black leatherette, also has a FireWire port on the side here, so you could tether it with FireWire 800. It has a couple of buttons on the end here. A P program button, which we'll go through, where you can customize your program it. Histogram button on the upper right-hand side here. The battery is on the bottom, and it's a Sony type battery. So they're easily found anywhere in the world, and you can get larger capacities as well.
Is that the 50?
I'm sorry?
No, it's not like.
Yeah, this slides onto the bottom there. Focusing, there's a focusing screen inside. That is it's not just a mask, it's the AccuMat focusing screen that you put into your 500 series camera. So it's always going to be really nicely crisp and clean. The focusing screen itself has a square crop. You could program the camera to just show you that square crop. So you'll see the square cropped image on the back. It'll capture the whole image, but it'll show you just a square crop. There's no wires that connect the camera, so you don't have anything going from the lens to the back at all. It goes onto the camera just like the A12 or A24 magazines did.
Any metadata?
Metadata is in focus, you could change all the metadata. It'll tell you the metadata of the digital capture, but not of the lens or the camera, because it's not integrated. In the H camera, it tells you the lens, the aperture, the shutter speed, all those are told to you in the metadata. But this one, because it's not integrated electronically, it's not going to give you that metadata. You could also take it off, put it on a technical field camera. You could put it on an Arca Swiss, a 4x5, any kind of camera, because there's on the back here, there's ports for syncing the back to those lenses. But you can put it on 4x5. What's great about it, if you do put it on a technical camera, I didn't program it, but I'll show you a bit later, you could actually see live view on the back camera and focus it 1-to-1. So you could actually compose and focus right on the back without having a computer, right in the field. This is the back menu, just to give you an idea of functionality. So when you do use it later, you know what to do. Your ISO range. There is a 4-way switch on the bottom right here to navigate the menu, and then there's a plus and minus switch to select those things. So your ISO, you hit the menu button here, and you can go through all of these. You got your white balance. You can do a custom white balance. All you have to do is shoot either a white or gray target. It'll tell you what the K value is, the color temperature, and it'll keep that setting until you change it. Exposure time, just generally up to 1/8 of a second. You could change it for longer exposures. You could do up to 1 hour exposure with this. And what's great about the Hasselblad backs is that you don't have to go through a dark calibration. With some of the other digital cameras, if you did a half-hour exposure, you would have to do a half-hour dark calibration and then the half-hour exposure, and that would be an hour of your time. You just shoot that half hour or 15 minutes or 20 minutes, and that it has the dark calibration built into that. So it's only one shot. Storage quality, it's either RAW file, and then you could also add a medium-sized JPEG to it. So if you need to get something to a client really quickly, it'll also process a JPEG with the RAW file. Storage, you could have folders, obviously, just like any digital camera, and that's where you also format your card. Settings is where you have this P button, which is a custom button, and I'll take you through that menu. The About button tells you the firmware information that's on the back itself. So the P button allows you to do all these different other functions. So I could set it so that all I have to do is press it once and it goes right to that custom function. And you have live view through the lens focusing capability. You can mark overexposure where there's an overexposure reading on the back of the image. You could delete the image, you could format the card, and focus confirmation. The focus confirmation brings you to a crosshair, which you could move around with the 4-way button anywhere on the image, and you hit it once more, it'll go right to 100%. It'll stay in that position, so say if you're shooting a portrait, you could just hit it twice and it'll go right to, say, the eye in that area. Most of the time, you're always going to use focus confirmation or live view, depending upon what you're using it for. Well, right now, I'm going to introduce you to my long friend, Lois Greenfield. We've known each other quite a while through Bron Color and Hasselblad times, and it's my pleasure to have her with me today.
As he was saying, I've been a devoted Hasselblad user since the 80s, and I'm still using my same manual 500C M back with now, since by the turn of the century, with a digital back on it. And I want to show you just a few minutes of images from my new book, Moving Still, and then from some contact sheets taken a couple of days ago with the new back. And I'll tell you a little bit about my process and how I get the pictures in my crazy old-fashioned way. And
Old-fashioned?
No, it's perennial. It's classic. So, and of course, I want to answer whatever questions you may have about, hopefully not too many technical questions, but my method and artistic preoccupations and how actually we get the pictures. going to say, before I tell you what I do, I'm going to tell you what I don't do. And I don't use Photoshop for anything other than smoothing out a tone, you know, and getting rid of a spot or two. But there's nothing reconfigured, recombined, nothing manipulated. Everything is a single in-camera image, because that's the way I started out doing it. And that's actually what fascinates me about it, getting something that looks so impossible, but it actually happened. And Jim has seen so many of my shoots over these years. Actually, I just thought I would put a picture up while I talk. So will it stop? Stop. So it's very helpful for the dancer to see what I'm doing. I don't want them to get over-involved, but for the communication point of view, they are not used to seeing themselves doing a specific movement. And with me, it's more complicated because they're not doing choreographed moments, they're doing improvisational moments, so they don't know how it looks. So that's fine for me because I prefer them to express something from the inside than to try to create a position from the outside looking in. But in terms of communicating things that are very important to me, such as their facial expression, their hand gestures, body positions, whatever, nothing beats pulling them over the monitor and saying, you know, what I want. And it gives them the opportunity then to either self-correct if they're making a mistake or figure out how they can do to change it. So in the old days, I didn't have that opportunity. I mean, we would take Polaroids, and the image was about 1.5 inches or 2 inches square on a 4x5, you know, 2 1/4 by 2 1/4, and that's how we communicated. But I have to say, I get more pictures with the digital. I don't necessarily get better pictures because the whole thing, and I tell this to all my students when I teach workshops, is it's about catching the moment, is about engaging with what's happening before the camera. And that's one reason why I don't use continuous action. First of all, it's not available for the way I shoot, but I don't want to do it because I want to take my own decisive moment. I don't want to hand that decision over to a camera that's going to take 10 or 20, you know, rapid fire images. And when I teach workshops where people bring their own cameras and are in a situation where they can use this function, I tell them don't. And then the dancer does something incredible. And they said, I didn't really get anything. And I say, well, that's because you had the camera make the decision for you. So what I do is I don't even look in the Hasselblad. I look straight at the dancers, and I decide when I want to shoot one moment. So all these 12 pictures here, it's very clearly not a sequence of movement, but a repetition of a specific phrase. And I take one shot, and then she regroups. And by the way, I did these last week, so they're really hot off the press. This is their debut here. And so I do one at a time, and I'll talk about that in a little more detail. I'm trying to think where I was with this. One at a time, that they repeat the same thing, and I may take a slightly different moment. I'm trying to think where I was with this. Well, I'll just move on.
Not using rapid fire.
Yeah. So it's not really possible the way I shoot technically. I'm sure it will be possible very shortly. But here's the main point. You can't wait until you see the moment you want to shoot and then shoot it. It's fine for landscape, it's fine for portraiture, it's fine for probably 99% of the things people shoot. But it ain't fine for dance photography. I mean, it's an anticipatory art form. And if you have to make that decision to take the picture before it happens. So you make it on the assumption or the expectation that the subsequent split second will resolve itself in, for me, an interesting way, because I'm looking for certain compositional relationships and all this. So I'm sort of making my decision based on the hope and the assumption that the next moment when I click will be what I want. And we do it many times because I can't actually see it, decide to do it, and decide to do it and hope to get it. Before I jump ahead, this is a very basic kind of situation where I'm having the dancer play with this skirt. We have one light from above. It's the Bron color grid light, beauty dish with a grid over it. and that's the only illumination, which is really cool because it gives me the sculptural shadows that I always want. And obviously that one light can't illuminate, 10 dancers in a line, but for, as many as 5, I find it really interesting to deal with the fall off. So I just picked one to show you more closely what it looks like. And we did kind of lighten it up, but I would probably show it more dark. So the way, as I was just explaining, the way that shot went, she did the same thing over and over again, and I was actually working on her hands and her arms a lot because they were very stiff. And for me, that kind of thing is a deal breaker in a picture, because if it isn't graceful and poetic, then it's not what I'm trying to convey. So after we did that basic series, I said, well, what more can I do with the same outfit and the same lighting and the same position and everything? So I did a whole series, of which I'm just showing you one, of black mosquito netting that we threw over her. And when I say we, I have assistants and also the dancers that throw things. So she might take one part of the fabric and an assistant from off screen might take the other and throw it in. At the same time, of course, we're often using a fan, which can make a shot or break a shot because it can interfere with the natural flow of the fabric, or it can create a flow where otherwise none would have existed. So this shot that I wanted to get to was, because I collect props wherever I go, and this was a hammock that I got in Belize at the airport coming home from a trip. And I think you saw this shot used once already in that opening slideshow. This is, of course, a shot last week. And I basically give this to the dancer as something to play with. I mean, it's a very cumbersome thing. It doesn't have any form or interesting shape of its own, the way costumes do and other props do. So I just asked her to improvise with it. And you can see she gets kind of tangled up in it. And unlike the other series, there's really no two alike here. It's not a simple dance movement that you can do over and over again. And in fact, I tell her not, just to keep trying different things. At the same time, directing her so that, for example, in the bottom row, she's throwing the fabric out and her knee is bent and in. And then the next time, I might say, well, just extend it. And then she'll do something very simple, the one after that. These are not, by the way, not necessarily sequential. I just picked some, that could illustrate some points. But that bottom, the one on the left, second from the right on the bottom row, she's just basically lifting it up. And then I said, jump, which is usually my solution to everything. Dance photography, if in doubt, just have the dancer jump. And then we got this, totally, let me move to it, one-of-a-kind shot that, that really fascinates me, because there's no way this shot could come again. I mean, when I'm shooting, if I see a shot that's easily repeatable, I want to move from it, because the moments that intrigue me the most are the ones that will never come again. And it is absolute reality. If you were there, you would have seen it, but you couldn't have seen it because I'm shooting at a 250th of a second with the Bron colors, when I can even shoot at a higher, at a shorter flash duration, but this works for my setup. And so I don't see it, no one sees it until we look at the picture. And then it is really nice to have the digital, to look at the computer and see it. But I think this is what I was trying to say before. Although I can take more pictures, I don't necessarily take better pictures than I took with the film back and no digital, because my working method has still stayed the same. And this is the third series. And so we've got the same outfit and the same everything. And I threw in certain props, these feathery things and some just plastic, plastic decorations. And this series is in sequential order. And you can see the one that Jim showed before, which I'll pull up in a second. But you kind of see what she started to do and all the changes that were made. And this is just so amazing because even if she's doing what seems to be the same thing, it's always coming out differently. And there's really no control, which I really like. I mean, I wouldn't be a good still life photographer where I had to decide in advance all the details of how the picture was going to look. I really like to be surprised by the shot and know that this picture, like the one I'm showing now, I couldn't do it again, which is why I always tell the people in my workshops, look at the subject because you don't get a second chance. She could have done this, and I could never get this moment again. Between the rhythms of the feathers and her skirt and her face and the lighting, it just doesn't happen again. And that's kind of like the excitement and the prize for me, that you get a moment that I never even could have thought of or dreamt of, and it becomes incarnated by these dancers who there's barely even any conversation between me and them. It's a kind of very subtle direction going on. Well, I shot mainly black and white because that seemed to be the artistic thing to do. And commercial clients, as well as my dance clients and magazines, weren't using color right away. I mean, commercial clients used it faster, and I would shoot chrome or color negative, again with my 500 cm series. But for the artwork, it always seemed like black and white was the way to go. Now that I started shooting digital in 2000, I actually never shoot. I first thought I'd be converting the files to black and white because that's the true, photographer's artistic statement or something. But I never do, and I actually see in color more. I mean, if you're shooting in black and white, you have to see in color because you have to realize that a red leotard will come out gray, But of course, with color, you don't have to worry about how an actual color translates to the black and white scale. But I find that one reason I am very excited about the color is it's all neutral tones. I mean, yes, every now and then, maybe every 100 pictures, there's a picture with a red dress in it. But for the most part, I choose a very neutral palette of clothing and props and a very simple background of black. This is black. I mean, it's actually a white background that's not lit, so it's dark. So the color for me makes it a little more three-dimensional. But going back to the old days with the square, I really fell in love with that square and incorporated the black border that was part of the negative as a dramatic and compositional force for the dancers. So shooting black and white background, highly acrobatic, impossibly gymnastic, kamikaze-type movements were often cut and truncated by the square because the square I never felt was a natural way of seeing. I think we see in horizontal rectangles, at least I do, I don't know. So it was very hard to compose within a square, especially dancers, which would take up lateral space. And usually for the Hasselblad pictures, you see a portrait or something that fits nicely in a square. But I became impassioned with the square because it gave the dancer's movement a dynamic tension by compressing them into this square or cropping them. Limbs were cropped off and people were going up instead of down or being yanked off the side. And that's how I got really started when I was starting with the Hasselblad and starting to shoot dancers in a studio. So it was very compositionally exciting, and I always left the black border on because also it's a source of pride for photographers to have a full frame image. The Cartier-Bressons, you have the full frame image, Now I don't feel that way about cropping necessarily because I feel I just crop it for how the picture will look best.
Whether you're a hobbyist or a professional, B&H has the answers to your questions. Experience a world of technology at our New York City superstore. Connect with us online or give us a call. Our staff of experts is happy to help.